Philadelphia, 1957. A college student walks through the woods near a quiet road. He sees a cardboard box half hidden in the underbrush. Inside, wrapped in a flannel blanket, is the body of a small boy. Naked, bruised, recently dead. No identification, no missing persons report, no family looking for him. For over 60 years, he had no name. They called him America's unknown child. This is the story of the boy in the box. February 25, 1957, a cold, gray winter day in the Fox Chase neighborhood of northeast Philadelphia. A young man named Frank was checking his muskrat traps along Susquehanna Road near a wooded area called Fox Chase. It was quiet, isolated, the kind of place where people dumped trash they didn't want found. As Frank walked through the brush, something caught his eye. A large cardboard box, the kind that might hold a bassinet or a baby's cradle. It was partially concealed by branches and dead leaves, as if someone had tried to hide it. At first, Frank didn't investigate closely. It was probably just garbage. But something about it bothered him. The placement seemed deliberate. Too deliberate. He moved closer and lifted one of the flaps. Inside was the body of a small boy. Frank stumbled backward, his heart racing. He ran from the woods and called the police immediately. Within the hour, Philadelphia Police Department officers arrived at the scene. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The boy appeared to be between 4 and 6 years old. He was naked except for being wrapped in a cheap flannel blanket. His body had been recently washed. His skin was clean, his hair freshly cut, though poorly, as if done by someone with no experience. There were bruises on his body, evidence of old and recent trauma. The cardboard box was a J.C. Penney bassinet container. Inside the box with the body, investigators found nothing else. No clothes, no identification, no note. Whoever had placed him there had stripped away every trace of his identity. The medical examiner determined that the boy had died only days before, possibly within 24 to 36 hours of being discovered. Cause of death was listed as undetermined, though there were signs of possible blunt force trauma to the head. The boy had been malnourished and showed evidence of chronic abuse. His fingernails and toenails were neatly trimmed. His hair had been crudely cut shortly before or after death. One detail stood out. The boy's hands and feet were wrinkled, suggesting he had been in water for an extended period before death, or that his body had been bathed thoroughly after death. The police launched an immediate investigation. They canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed residents, checked missing persons reports. Surely someone was looking for this child. Surely someone had noticed a boy this age suddenly disappearing. But no one came forward. No missing persons report matched. No one recognized him. The boy had no fingerprints on file, which meant he'd never been registered in school, never been to a hospital that kept records, never been officially documented anywhere. It was as if he had never existed. The Philadelphia Police Department pulled out every stop. This wasn't just another case. This was a murdered child with no name, no family, no one to speak for him. The department made it personal. Detective Samuel Weinstein took the lead. He was a veteran investigator, experienced and thorough, but even he had never seen anything like this. The first step was getting the boy's face out to the public. The medical examiner's office cleaned and dressed the body, then photographed the boy's face. These weren't autopsy photos. They were styled to look as if he were sleeping, peaceful, almost alive. The police printed over 400,000 flyers with the boy's photograph and distributed them throughout Philadelphia and surrounding areas. They sent copies to police departments across the country. The images were published in newspapers nationwide. The response was overwhelming, but not in the way investigators hoped. Thousands of tips poured in. People claimed to recognize the boy. Parents of missing children called, desperate for closure. Psychics offered visions, conspiracy theorists spun elaborate tales. But every lead turned into a dead end. DNA testing didn't exist yet, and without a name or fingerprints, there was no way to definitively identify anyone. The detectives pursued every possible angle. They traced the cardboard box to a JCPenney store, but hundreds had been sold. They examined the flannel blanket. It was cheap, mass-produced, impossible to trace. They searched for reports of unregistered children in the area, children who might have been kept hidden from authorities. One promising lead involved a foster home in the area. Investigators heard rumors of a boy matching the victim's description who had been living there and then suddenly disappeared. They investigated the home thoroughly, interviewed the foster parents and neighbors, but found no concrete evidence. The home had records for all their children. None were missing. Another theory focused on carnival workers and transient communities. Perhaps the boy had been traveling with people who moved frequently, which would explain why no one in Philadelphia recognized him. Detectives contacted circuses, carnivals, and traveling shows that had been in the area. Again, nothing. The break that investigators hoped for came in the form of physical evidence analysis. Forensic experts examined the boy's body more carefully. They found traces of a specific type of haircutting shears marks on his scalp. His hair had been cut aggressively, almost violently, very shortly before death. Why would someone do this? Two theories emerged. Either the killer was trying to change the boy's appearance to prevent identification, or this was part of a pattern of abuse where the child's hair was cut as punishment. The condition of his body told a darker story. The boy showed signs of long-term neglect and abuse. His growth was stunted, suggesting chronic malnutrition. He had several healed fractures, indicating previous injuries that had never received medical attention. His muscle development was poor, consistent with a child who had been confined or prevented from normal physical activity. One particularly disturbing detail emerged from the autopsy: the contents of the boy's stomach. His last meal had been partially digested, and it appeared to be some kind of vegetable or bean-based food. This wasn't particularly unusual, except that it suggested he had eaten within hours of his death, meaning whoever killed him had fed him first. This pointed away from a random abduction and toward someone who had regular access to and responsibility for the child. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to slow. Detectives had pursued thousands of leads and found nothing concrete. The boy was buried in a potter's field, a cemetery for unknown or indigenous people, in a small grave marked simply with the number of his case file. But the community didn't forget. A woman named Remington Bristow, who worked in the area, became obsessed with the case. She visited the boy's grave regularly, bringing flowers and toys. She conducted her own investigation, spending years following up on leads that police had abandoned. She interviewed neighbors, searched property records, and kept detailed files on every piece of information she uncovered. Bristow developed her own theory about what had happened. She believed the boy had been kept hidden by a family in the area, possibly as an illegitimate child or a secret adoption that went wrong. She focused her attention on a particular house near where the body was found, a house that had been quickly vacated shortly after the boy's body was found. She learned that a man had purchased a bassinet, the same type that the boy's body had been found in, from a JCPenney store shortly before the murder. The man matched the description of someone who had lived in that house. But by the time she traced this information, the man had disappeared. She could never prove her theory. Over the decades, several major theories emerged about the boy's identity and how they died. Each had its supporters, its evidence, and its problems. The M theory. In 1960, a woman who identified herself only as M came forward to police. She told a disturbing story that seemed to unlock the mystery. M claimed that in 1954, she had purchased a baby from a desperate mother at a roadside market for $3. She took the child home, intending to raise him. But soon she began to notice something was wrong with the boy. He seemed developmentally delayed, difficult to manage, and her daughter, who helped care for him, grew increasingly frustrated with him. According to M, in February 1957, her daughter was giving the boy a bath. She beat him severely during the bathing and the boy died. Panicked, they cut his hair to alter his appearance, wrapped him in a blanket, and disposed of his body in the box where Frank eventually found him. The story was specific, detailed, and seemed to match many of the facts of the case. Police investigated immediately. They located M's daughter and brought her in for questioning. The daughter denied everything. She said her mother was mentally unstable and prone to making up stories for attention. Investigators searched the house where M lived and found nothing. No evidence of a child having been there, no records of a purchase, no witnesses to corroborate the story. M died in 1982, taking whatever truth she knew with her. Her daughter continued to deny any involvement until her own death. The theory remained tantalizing but unproven. The stepdaughter's account. In 2002, a woman came forward with another disturbing story. She claimed that in the 1950s, her abusive parents had purchased a boy from his birth parents. The child was kept in their home, hidden from neighbors and authorities. She described terrible abuse. The boy was beaten regularly, kept in the basement, barely fed. According to her account, her mother flew into a rage one day and beat the boy to death. Her father then cut the boy's hair, bathed the body, and disposed of it in a box in the woods. The woman provided specific details about the location where the body was found, details that hadn't been made public. This gave her story credibility. She even took police to the house where she claimed this had happened, a house very near where the body was discovered. But once again, there was no physical evidence. The house had been sold multiple times since the 1950s. Any evidence that might have existed was long gone. The woman's parents were both dead, so they couldn't be questioned or charged. Police investigated the story thoroughly, but couldn't corroborate it with independent evidence. Some investigators believed this was the real answer. Others thought the woman might have conflated real abuse she suffered with details she'd read about the famous case. The truth remained elusive. Some investigators believed the boy came from outside Philadelphia entirely. Perhaps he was the child of carnival workers, traveling performers, or people living on the margins of society who moved frequently. This theory explained why no one in Philadelphia recognized him and why there was no missing persons report. If his family was transient, constantly moving from town to town, they might not have been registered anywhere. When the boy died or was killed, they simply disposed of his body and moved on. Support for this theory came from reports of carnivals and traveling shows that had been in the Philadelphia area in early 1957. Some witnesses claimed to have seen a boy matching the victim's description with one of these groups. But carnival workers were notoriously hard to track, especially decades after the fact. Most kept poor records. Many used false names. The investigation into this angle never produced concrete results. The hidden child theory. Perhaps the most tragic theory was that the boy had never been part of normal society at all. He might have been born to an unmarried woman who kept him hidden to avoid scandal. Or he could have been a child with disabilities whom a family kept concealed because of the stigma at that time. In the 1950s, it wasn't uncommon for families to hide children with developmental disabilities or physical deformities. These children were sometimes kept in basements, attics, or back rooms, never registered with schools or government agencies, never seen by neighbors. If the boy was such a child, he would have no birth certificate, no medical records, no documentation. When he died, either from abuse, neglect, or even natural causes, the family might have panicked and disposed of the body rather than face questions about why they had kept a child hidden for years. This theory explained many aspects of the case. The lack of any missing persons report,
The evidence of chronic neglect and abuse. The fact that the boy's body was carefully cleaned before disposal, suggesting someone who had cared for him in some capacity felt guilt or wanted to show some final dignity. The child trafficking theory. A darker possibility was that the boy was a victim of an illegal adoption or child trafficking ring. In the 1950s, black market baby sales were more common than most people realized. Desperate women would sell their babies, and buyers would take them without any legal documentation. If the boy had been acquired this way, he would have no official identity. If he proved difficult to manage, became sick, or if his buyers decided they didn't want him anymore, they might have killed him or let him die, then disposed of his body. Evidence for this theory was circumstantial but compelling. The story from M about purchasing a baby for $3 fit this pattern. The fact that the boy showed signs of long-term care, trims nails, recently bathed, alongside evidence of abuse, suggested someone who had responsibility for him but didn't want him. For decades, the case went cold. The original investigators retired or died. The boy's grave in the potter's field became overgrown. Only a few dedicated individuals, like Remington Bristow and later the Vidocq Society, a group of retired investigators who take on cold cases, kept the investigation alive. Then, in the 2000s, new technology emerged that changed everything: DNA analysis. In 1998, the boy's body was exhumed so that DNA samples could be taken. This was before modern genealogical DNA techniques. So investigators could only create a basic DNA profile that would be useful if they had something to compare it to. They didn't, yet. The DNA was entered into national databases. Investigators hoped that somewhere, somehow, a relative would submit their DNA for another reason and they'd get a match. Years passed with no hits. In 2019, the case got new attention when investigators announced they were using forensic genealogy, the same technique that had caught the Golden State Killer. This method uses DNA testing services like 23andMe and Ancestry.com to find distant relatives, then works backward through family trees to identify the person. The process was painstakingly slow. Genealogists built family trees going back generations, tracking down descendants of people who might have been related to the boy. They contacted potential relatives, explaining the case and requesting DNA samples for comparison. Finally, in December 2022, after 65 years, investigators made an announcement. They had identified the boy. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He had been born on January 13, 1953. He was 4 years old when he died. The identification came through a combination of genetic genealogy and traditional detective work. Investigators found distant relatives through DNA, built out family trees, and eventually identified Joseph's birth mother and father. The revelation brought both relief and new heartbreak. Now they knew his name, but the mystery of what happened to him deepened. Joseph had been born to a couple in the Philadelphia area. His parents were young, struggling, and, by some accounts, not equipped to care for a child. At some point in his short life, Joseph disappeared from official records. There was no record of his death being reported, no missing persons report filed, nothing. Investigators tried to track down surviving family members. They wanted answers. Who had custody of Joseph when he died? Who killed him? Why was he hidden? But many of the people who might have had answers were already dead. Joseph's parents had died years earlier. Other family members claimed they never knew he existed, or that they had lost track of him when he was very young. One particularly painful detail emerged. Joseph's mother had given birth to him, but he was quickly placed with other family members, or possibly given up informally. She may not have known what happened to him after that. She lived until 2019, dying 3 years before her son was finally identified. The identification raised as many questions as it answered. If Joseph had family, Why did no one report him missing? If he was living with relatives, why did they keep him hidden? Who had custody of him in the final days and hours of his life? Police announced they were treating the case as an active homicide investigation. They believed people are still alive who knew what happened to Joseph. They appealed to the public. Someone out there knows the truth. Joseph Augustus Zarelli finally has his name back. The gravestone that once read America's Unknown Child was replaced with one bearing his real name. But justice remains elusive. No one has been charged with his murder. The people who knew what happened to him, who either killed him or helped conceal his death, have largely escaped accountability. What we know for certain is heartbreaking. Joseph was a little boy who spent his short life hidden from the world, suffering abuse, never going to school, never having his existence officially acknowledged. And when he died, the people responsible for him threw his body away like garbage. The case changed how police handle unidentified remains. It led to improvements in missing persons databases, better coordination between jurisdictions, and new protocols for investigating child abuse cases. Joseph's story helped inspire the use of DNA technology in cold cases. Community members in Philadelphia still leave toys and flowers at Joseph's grave. His story has been featured in books, documentaries, and countless articles. He has become a symbol of all the children who suffer in silence, unknown and unprotected. The FBI and Philadelphia police continue to investigate. They encourage anyone with information to come forward. There may still be people
alive who know what happened in that house in Fox Chase in February 1957. There may be family members who kept secrets, neighbors who saw something suspicious, people who heard stories they never shared with police. Joseph Augustus Zarelli was 4 years old when he died. He should have lived a full life, gone to school, made friends, had a family of his own. Instead, he became one of America's most enduring mysteries, known for decades only as the boy in the box. Now we know his name, but we still don't fully know his story. And until we do, his case remains open, a reminder that some mysteries cut deeper than others, and that justice delayed is never justice denied if we refuse to give up. The boy in the box finally has his name. Now he deserves his justice.